My friends, in this video we'll cover the larger operational side of things, as well as the granular tactical situation on the front line. Our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia is now facing a real battle of attrition. Ukraine went to have to deal with one Bakhmut to multiple Bakhmut-sized urban battles. And the problem is they can't effectively defend all of them with the same strength. Hurrah! You see, a couple days ago, Russian paratroopers of the 98th Airborne Division raised their flag on the Canal microdistrict, a neighborhood of the now infamous Chasiv Yar located on the eastern side of the Seversky Donetsk Canal. Thing is, as you can see on screen, this sector of the town has essentially ceased to exist. Reuters summarized the situation pretty well. Ukrainian forces pull back from part of strategic eastern town. In a couple months, they better not say that Chasiv Yar was not strategically important anyway. As a reminder, the Russian paratroopers got their first foothold inside the Canal microdistrict on the 4th of April. And it took them 3 months to capture an area that is 1,300 meters long by 1,600 meters. What is it going to be like for the rest of the city? One of the reasons why it took so long is because Ukraine sent in some of its most elite units to counterattack, like the International Legion and the Kraken Regiment. But the moment they rotated out, well, it was GG well played. Now the next step for the Russian army will be to cross over the Seversky Donetsk Canal and storm Chasiv Yar proper. Although part of the mainstream media is finally realizing the true situation on the battlefield, Forbes decided to inhale the copium. The Russian military has reportedly lost 99,000 troops since the start of the Chasiv Yar campaign in April.
We are winning!
Did they really though? 99,000 casualties? As a reminder, it was the 98th Russian Airborne Division that was tasked with the capture of that sector of Chasiv Yar. So you're telling me that one division lost 10 times its manpower? It doesn't even make sense. Actually, with all the drones flying around, it would be easy to have footage of these thousands upon thousands of Russian casualties. Whoops, apparently it's top secret. Meanwhile, another urban battle is taking place in Krasnohorivka, where Donbass coal miners and their infamous turtle tanks consolidated their first foothold in Krasnohorivka on the 24th of April. Now 2.5 months later, Russian assaulted detachments are doubling their efforts to finalize the capture of the second half of the town. Just like in Chasiv Yar, we're witnessing some sort of rugby melee. And equally took forever for the Russians to make some gains. According to the latest news, the Ukrainian army only holds 1/4 of Krasnohorivka. It's a complete disaster. Personally, I think they're already working on their pullout skills, because with the current rate of advance of Russian forces, the Ukrainians might soon abandon the city. More on this at the end of the video. Of course, the Ukrainian armed forces are making this as painful and difficult as possible, hoping to tire out enemy troops and force them to stop their offensive. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads, so make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. Let's start with the first hotspot, the Battle of Chasiv Yar, which is located right here in this section of the front. In this area, it's Russian paratrooper units that are running the show. North of Bakhmut, we have the 106th Airborne Division that is pushing towards Siversk, and we have the 98th Airborne Division whose mission is the conquest of Chasiv Yar. Let's go back to early June. That was the situation on the first day of that month. Russian forces were clearing Ivanivsky. They were pushing along this forest, along the Seversky Donetsk Canal. They had established a foothold inside the Canal microdistrict that they were trying to expand. And lastly, they were trying to push out of the village of Bogdanivka. On the 6th of June, in order to celebrate the D-Day landings, a Russian infantry unit was spotted clearing this part of the canal, perhaps to open the path for an amphibious assault. Due to the strategic nature of this crossing, The Ukrainian command sent reinforcements, and the Russians essentially made little to no progress. The next day, the paratroopers attempted a flanking maneuver in the Canal macro-district. In this video, we see a Russian 7-man unit pushing forward until they got fired at by an enemy automatic grenade launcher. At once, the 98th Airborne Division seemed to have made significant gains, because more Russian paratroopers were spotted right here on the map. The problem of fighting in an urban environment is that the enemy can hide in any corner. Here we see a first Russian B-gnome of 2 soldiers crossing the street. They're running as fast as they can into the basement of one of the buildings. Once the position is safe, the rest of the unit can move forward. The battle for the Canal micro-district was not only street by street or block for block, but also room by room. As you can see in this insane footage, these Russian soldiers launched a surprise attack by flanking an enemy position using the balcony. And I mean, just take a look at this building. Every floor has been wiped out. That's when the paratroopers raised their battle flags on top of one of these commie blocks. On top, we have the imperial flag of Russia, and below their divisional flag. This is when pro-Ukrainian deep state UA had no other choice but to mark this territorial loss on its map. Essentially, the entire eastern half of the Canal macro-district was now under enemy control. One of the main reasons Ukraine is struggling right now is Russian firepower that simply pulverizes Ukrainian strongholds one after the other. Of course, there was always Russian artillery, but now there's also airstrikes. According to United 24, Russia can produce around 3,000 FAB bombs a month. The good old Grozny skincare treatment. Oh yeah, a little side note before I forget. In one of my previous videos, I showed you this footage. And according to the latest news, Russian units were spotted right next to the Kalinivka bridge. And you know why? Since all the surrounding Ukrainian fortifications were empty. However, it seems this Russian unit simply got lost. The Ukrainians Ctrl-Alt-deleted them and quickly gained back control of the sector. After the loss of half of the micro-district, on the 10th of June, Deep State conceded the fall of Ivanivske. The Ukrainians probably had strong positions in this forest, which most likely allowed them to carry out raids into the settlement. But once the Russians captured the area, that's when Ivanivske was marked as fully secured by the Russian army. It's important to note that throughout the months of April, May, and June, the International Legion and the Kraken Regiment made the Russians pay a heavy price for every meter. The following video I'm going to show you is extremely interesting because it shows you the typical experience of combatants in Ukraine. It starts with a group of Ukrainian soldiers in what seems to be a Russian Senator APC, which is driving towards the Canal micro-district. Without counting the crew, the Russian can take up to 10 passengers, so essentially an entire squad. Instead of driving in convoys, the vehicle get to the front one by one in order to avoid being detected by enemy drones and artillery. Now pay attention once they get to the micro-district. The soldiers throw out 2 ATGMs, bags and boxes filled with ammunition, but also very important, entire packs of water bottles. What I learned is that every relief force essentially brings all their supplies they need with them. Usually enough to sustain themselves and to fight for 3 days until they're rotated out. And all the supplies and ammunition they don't use during these 3 days, they leave it there for the next group. Actually, here we can even see the unit rotating out of the battlefield that the Kraken guys are replacing. Then we see that they have these 2 boxes with some sort of antennas, which are most likely electronic warfare kits. As you can imagine, those are probably used to jam enemy FPV drones. I'm not an electronic warfare expert. If that's your thing, I will be happy to hear your explanation, but that's how they activate the jammer. Then the squad from the Kraken Regiment runs from one building to another, all the way up to their assigned combat position. I can't show you the next part, but all I can say is that they're taking care of a wounded soldier from the previous unit. The Kraken squad then takes up a multi-level building. One soldier is posted there, another here. I'm showing you all this so you can see how these buildings are defended in real time. Meanwhile, this guy went on the 2nd floor with his machine gun. This one is on the 1st floor and he's firing his rifle. Then he used his quick draw perk to switch to his secondary weapon, this 40mm Milcor grenade launcher. Overall, I want you to pay attention to the firepower of this infantry squad. This is one of the things that makes the Kraken Regiment an elite unit. There's no way regular Ukrainian squads and platoons will have as much firepower. In the end, the camera guy runs back to the Russian APC when the wounded soldier was put, and altogether they will drive back to the rear. At the same time, further south, the Ukrainians launched a strong counterattack against Klishivka, placing parts of the map back into the gray zone. Honestly, I don't know what's there, but the Ukrainians won't let go of that place. But simply, the situation in this sector is far from glorious for the Russian armed forces. The front line barely changed in over a year. And to make things even more difficult, Ukrainian drone operators targeted Russian reinforcements at the rear near the village of Odradivka. By the 19th of June, the Russians launched their own counterattack, and one of their units reached the bottom end of Klishivka when it got targeted by Ukrainian artillery. The situation remains chaotic with lots of back and forth. And of course, I'll let you know if the situation changes. Back to the micro district. The International Legion and the Kraken Regiment were rotated out completely by the 12th of June. That's when they were replaced by territorial defense units and various battalions filled with conscripts. And guess what happened? That's when Russian paratroopers started making progress again. Russian radio operators quickly found out that they were now facing Ukrainian regulars, or even worse, conscripts, territorial defense units. Russian infantry squads used this opportunity and continued pushing forward. As you can see here, the problem comes from Ukrainian drones, so units are forced to split up, and everything takes longer than expected. The unit you just saw tried to flank the Ukrainians in this set of buildings from this side, using the cover of this forested area and this residential sector. Of course, in response, the Ukrainians sent one unit after the other to kick out the enemy from there. In this video, a Russian FPV strikes one of these vehicles that came in reinforcements. Although the vehicle had to be abandoned, we see about 7 to 8 soldiers make it out alive. And in the end, that's what's important. Now want to see something wild? Check this out. This footage of this Russian FPV drone strike was geolocated not even 100 meters away of this previous video I showed you of the Russian soldiers. Drone strike on Ukrainian armored vehicle here, and Russian soldiers pushing under fire from automatic grenade launchers right here. Small world, eh? As always, it's a game of who can prevent the enemy's reinforcements from reaching the contact line. In this one, a Russian drone from the 98th Airborne Division spotted a Ukrainian M113 APC coming back from a fire support mission near the Canal. Meanwhile, in this one, another abandoned M113 is finished off by an FPV drone, this time inside the micro-district. Same thing for Ukrainian strikes on Russian reinforcements, like a grenade drop in this fire team, or this bullseye artillery strike on this other squad. Heavy fighting continued at the center of the Canal micro-district. Every side sent in its assault units into the meat grinder. In this footage, you can see a squad of 7 Russian infantrymen hiding behind some ruins. One of them is equipped with a rocket launcher, which he fires at a neighboring 5-story building. Then, one by one, in calm formation, the Russian soldiers then run from one cover to another. As of the 29th of June, despite heavy resistance by our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia, the loss of their positions between Kalinivka and the railway line, plus the Battle of Attrition inside the Canal micro-district, led the Ukrainian command to consider a withdrawal on the western side of the Seversky Donetsk Canal. As you can see in this picture, that day Russian intelligence recorded active back and forth movement of armored vehicles between the western and eastern sides of the canal. So this was promptly followed by heavy shelling of the remaining Ukrainian positions. As you know, carrying a retreat under enemy fire is one of the hardest military maneuvers to accomplish. In the end, the withdrawal took 3 days. And we have to admit the Ukrainian command accomplished this mission with excellent skills and coordination. By the end of July 2nd, Russian forces had completely overrun the Canal micro-district. The Russian flag was raised on the last building of that sector of Chasiv Yar, 3 months after the first paratroopers established a foothold inside the Canal micro-district. Hurrah! By the 6th of July, almost this entire section of the Seversky Donetsk Canal was now under Russian control. That's when the Ukrainians switched to active defense, making heavy use of their 82 and 120mm mortars. Of course, we have to talk about future Russian operations against Chasiv Yar. But it took 3 months for the Russian army to capture a small urban area of 1.7 square kilometers. What is it gonna be like for Chasiv Yar proper? I can already schedule the next Chasiv Yar video in 3 months. Jokes aside, if we take a look at this fortifications map, we see the southern crossing on the highway west of Ivanivsky is completely locked up. Big bastions, lots of fortifications and defensive positions. This area is going to be extremely difficult to break through. The opposite side of the Canal macro district is also densely fortified. So I only see 2 options for the Russian army. Option 1, head-on assault and blast your way through using superior firepower, FAB airstrikes, artillery and so on. Option 2, maneuver your way around enemy strongholds and use the path of least resistance. The Russians could push across this forested area and then swing north. And at the same time they could storm Kalinivka and then cross the Seversky Donetsk Canal. To add to this, the Russians have sent more and more FPV drones in that sector in order to hunt down for any heavy equipment that could prevent the crossing of the canal. Now let's move 70 kilometers to the south towards Krasnohorivka for another difficult urban battle, rugby melee. By early June, the Russians had already captured the southern half of the town. The battle plan was relatively simple: push north beyond the Krasnohorivka refractory plant. On the 9th of June, the 5th Brigade of the DPR Oplot sent a column of 5 armored vehicles towards Krasnohorivka. Because the Ukrainians have less firepower, the Russians can manage to send reinforcements as part of convoys. Eventually, the column separated in 2, 1 unit of 3 and another of 2, both with a tank leading the way. Once they reached the entrance of the urban area, they were met with a Ukrainian welcome party. Swarms of FPV drones plus artillery, and the entire column ended up at the scrapyard. Now this is all from Ukrainian footage. We don't know if the infantry component inside the armored vehicles managed to disembark. But since we don't see them in the video, they probably did. On top of that, that's 1 column that got ambushed. But how many managed to go through back and forth unhindered? By June 10th, although the eastern outskirts were marked as under Russian control, the area was not 100% secured. Russian infantry units did a lot of trench clearing in this sector, for example. Small fire teams went through this absolute maze of shattered trenches looking for enemy points of resistance. One of the main strongholds of the Ukrainian defenders was this set of high-rise buildings. They overlook the entire battlefield and they're almost immune to artillery strikes. Since a frontal attack could be costly, the local Russian commander probably attempted to encircle them by pushing along Sovetskaya Street. In this video, Russian infantrymen rush towards the 2 doors of a commie block. Eventually, one of the 2 groups runs out after getting fired at by some Ukrainians. On the 17th of June, Russian assault detachments advanced 150 meters in this direction, and by the 21st, they gained another 100 meters. Progress is slow because the Russians are using infiltration tactics as they look for gaps inside the Ukrainian line of defense. On top of that, most of these recon missions and attacks are done by small tactical units, like this 3-man team maneuvering in between houses. By the 26th of June, it became clear that this Ukrainian line of defense in the city center was getting pushed back. And 1 week later, the Ukrainian positions west of Krasnohorivka collapsed. According to the latest news, by the 11th of July, Russian infantry units were spotted here and there. This major flanking attack from the eastern side of Krasnohorivka completely overwhelmed the strategic commie block district I told you about earlier, as well as the hospital. Now all what's left for the Ukrainians is the residential sector northwest of the city, which to be honest is impossible to hold in the long run. I personally think the Ukrainians are already doing a step-by-step withdrawal of Krasnohorivka. Before we end, I wanted to show you something nobody talks about. South of Krasnohorivka, there's this entire 8-kilometer front filled with Ukrainian troops just sitting in tree lines. So parallel to the Battle of Krasnohorivka, we also have to look at the Battle of Horivka. Now, if Krasnohorivka falls, all these Ukrainian troops north of the city will also have to quickly pull back if they want to avoid an encirclement. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.